Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to another episode of New Cyber Frontier. I'm your host, Tim Montgomery, and today we have a very special guest, Chris Gorog. Sir, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Yourself, Tim?
I'm doing well. Everybody knows Chris is one of the hosts for New Cyber Frontier, but as we've alluded to in previous episodes, I believe he does much more than that. Among things, he is the chair for digital privacy, IEEE chapter, working towards internet privacy, use of blockchain with a company called Blockframe Inc., using that blockchain to actually do privacy in the internet and also just in general across the board support integrity of information for transactions. So good research products, lots of stuff going on there, especially with utility companies these days, right, Chris? So
good things. Yep.
Yep.
Good time to be in this industry.
Yes, it is. Very good time. So today with Chris, we were discussing this in previous conversations and on some of the other episodes, we've introduced it a couple of times, but today we want to talk about zero trust. The executive order that the president has put out in the past year or two, the order was it 14028. It talks about the cybersecurity measures that the government's trying to implement across the board to protect the American people. And then we're going to get into what are those concepts for, what are they using? This zero trust concept that they're using. What is it? How does it break down? What does it mean? Is it truly something that would cover the executive order? Right.
Yeah. Is it the right direction? I guess I would ask.
Yeah, right. And then the executive order gets into some other things. So without further ado, so let's talk a little bit about the executive order. The executive order, when did it come out again? Let's see.
May 12th, 2021.
Right. May 12th.
So it's been about 10 months.
Yeah, that's coming straight out of the White House press, the website there connects to it. Yep. So it's been a while. And I do know that in the government, they have been working aggressively towards migrating us or maturing our systems into such things, evaluating such things. So this is something that's in the executive order as well. But the big question is...
CISA has done a lot of work with defining some pillars and some other things. They have a whole initial framework up.
The NIST standards, they've come into play. There's several other industries that are talking about infrastructure for the security, which is CISA, the CISA, that department or branch of Homeland Security talks an awful lot about cybersecurity and protection of infrastructure. And we're not talking about just your house. We're talking about the whole of the infrastructure for the United States, North American continent, and probably other countries if they let us. But really,
yeah. So looking at I'm just looking at the order here, Tim, and right in there is agencies responsible for investigative and remediation cyber incidents, Cyber and Information Security Agency, CISA, Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, and other elements such as intelligence community, IC. So spelled out right in the executive order.
Yeah, and the National Institution for Standards and Technology. It'll play roles in the cybersecurity efforts to adapt controls. So some of those things that look like that apply. I know in discussions with several of my counterparts, we've got into the understanding of some of these impacts that will apply to the internet, will apply to government in its real-time interfacing to the private and public sector. But I guess really the executive order itself, it speaks to unclassified and classified information. It also speaks to unveiling information among what they were referring to as service providers. And those service providers are cloud service provisions. There's telecommunications and communication service provision for all those providers out there, where there are regulations and rules about keepsakes. But in this case, it talks about cybersecurity events, the information that applies there. So there's a ruling in that executive order that talks to the fact that if this specific information falls under guidelines that you cannot do this means of sharing among one another in agencies, or from commercial, like your internet service provider collecting data and seeing cybersecurity activities, but yet that's private information. So now they're looking at this executive order to help provision ways to share that information in the case of cyber security breach events that occur, doing it among not only FBI, but also among other agencies, trailing from Homeland Security, cloud service provisions like AWS and Azores, Google's efforts. So I guess the big question here is privacy. How do you think this potentially will impact privacy among those that are using such services?
Well, I've read over this many times. Every new president comes out with one of these. And in contrasting the differences between what the last president said and the last president before that about cybersecurity, it's more of who they involve, the agencies, the requirements, I guess, of the government. It doesn't seem to go further than the government when it comes to that reach a lot of times, though, because we know the next president's going to redefine it.
Yeah, and it is an executive order, right? So what does that mean? That the next president can actually stop the execution of this order or re-provision it in a different manner.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, what we've seen in our history is that's pretty typical from president to president. I mean, I think it's been 5 or 6 now in my time. So lots of presidents gone through. Executive orders change with each given president. So who knows whether this cybersecurity measure will move forward. It seems like it's at a slow pace, though. The government is taking up and transitioning and trying to protect information at the same time. But privacy is impacted across the board, especially when we're talking about service providers, cloud, commercial, communication assets. And does that mean?
I think for the first time for the first time they may be addressing that issue. Doesn't that mean it hasn't been there before?
Oh, right.
It just was not talked about. So is it making anything new as far as privacy? No. Is it addressing the problem? I think it's just starting to acknowledge.
You're probably right. It probably brings to light some of the subjects that they need to be talking about and deciding what the verbiage is going to stay. So we're going to take a break, Chris, and we will come back and talk more about this right after our commercial break.
Blockframe Technology offers next-generation blockchain-managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Okay, welcome back to NewCyberFrontier. I'm your host, Tim Montgomery, and I'm here with a very special guest, Chris Gorog. And we're actually defining what the executive order is. It's 14028, what it referred to as President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity and trying to expand the abilities among service providers to share information during cybersecurity events or what potentially could be cybersecurity events. And some of the things we were talking about is the potential of impact from the commercial side and the private sector impacting into this, and how the government is trying to mature this model, which we'll get into that a little bit about the zero trust factors in there. But I really want to examine the concept behind service providers inside this executive order, and the fact that this is an executive order, right? Presidents, they change. So
yeah.
So what do
you
you
go
think?
back to our? I think when you go back to our buzzword discussion,
Yeah,
the one thing I see that we're getting more buzzwords in these executive orders. So to be the cynic sometimes, but
I know, but it sounds so like like the concept behind the general. There's only so many things, you know, that they hear words over and over and over, and they use those. So they're executive words, basically. Everybody knows what we're talking about when we say these things.
Yeah, we got FedRAMP acknowledged now. We have Zero Trust started, which was really kind of the new thing right around the time when this came out, and now everybody's talking about it, and everybody decided let's find the new buzzwords they put out in this executive order, and let's align them with the things we've already been doing and just rename everything we've already been doing.
Yeah, that sounds more like what the executive order. I mean, it definitely looks like that, but the concept behind like the cloud service provisions, I know there's a lot of move to the cloud and a lot of applications. We're trending into a world of agile production of applications on a cloud service provision on a platform that's out there, which has different service models, different platforms you can use. So information's now starting to move more from private individual type stuff into storages that are being reached interface wise by every device. We talked some about how that implies to Internet of Things and the severities of standard misalignment of security standards among that. There's major impacts there. So the provision of privacy among relating more openness between agencies and more openness between communication, providers, like a service provider like Comcast or Xfinity. You think that's what they're meaning when they say telecommunications and communication providers on there?
So I did a quick search real quick because you brought up the question of privacy, and I wanted to see how is privacy used in this executive order. It's the security and privacy of the American people, the applicable privacy laws that the directors are supposed to apply to, adhere to, appropriate and effective protection of privacy and civil liberties is spelled out as a bullet point under, let's see, where's this section? I've lost track of it. In removing barriers for sharing threat information. So in the removing barriers within 45 days, it's basically they're supposed to report how they're handling this stuff within a certain amount of time around privacy and civil liberties. Under modernizing federal government cybersecurity, while protecting privacy and civil liberties is addressed in there as a parameter to try to align with. And there's a couple more instances. The last one is data shall be retained in a manner consistent with privacy laws. So we're still very much focused on tell us how you're doing privacy right now. Let's try to consider it and make sure you meet the laws.
Yeah. So they did contribute to trying to protect privacy within this executive order. So
they've addressed it. I would say it's it's being addressed. But I would almost say again as a byproduct, oh yeah, by the way.
Yeah, it's secondary, but sharing information depending on what it is and calling it a cybersecurity event.
Yeah. Well, and it's definitely related to information contained by agencies,
right?
Not to that they seem to say we care about the individual involved with that information, just that our agencies don't release that information.
Yeah. So I wonder how, like Apple, how would they see an executive order saying they need to share information? If there's service,
I guess the first question I would have, I mean, you're in the government, you take heed to these executive orders. In the private sector, what I would question whether Apple really even does any more than read these over and say, where's the government at?
That's true. So the way it looks, contractual agreements. So with Apple, iPhone, government has contracts with iPhone about what they use as far as phone usage, mobile phone usage. So I'm assuming
so it'd be compliance so they can sell products to the government would be where they're at then.
Yes, it would
I could see
apply
that.
as a service provider when they refer to it in here. If you're AWS, if you're Amazon Web Services, and you've got clouds and you're using a GovCloud, which FedRAMP is addressed in here, and you're using the GovCloud, which is a massive entity among agencies, all agencies, then that's considered your service provider. If you are doing integral linking networks among geographical locations solely for the use of transferring information or communication efforts between two locations that are considered government, and those are actually privatized circuits, then that's a communications service provider. So they are referencing a lot of this in here. Now, I'm assuming that most of these individuals that in contract, if they have contracts with such government entities, which is what it really is relevant to, that they've already worked this out as far as what they want to do and what they would, what they have the privilege of sharing with one another. So I'm sure they're going within guidelines of privacy. So,
and you started out asking about privacy, and then I know zero trust, and trust was a big thing. When I searched for trust in a document and the relationship that they bring to trust, they definitely put a lot more weight on trust. And in a lot of the terms are interagency, interoperation of government components, knowing where the information came from, so the accountability of and the reliability of the provider that made the information. Definitely more focused on trust in a big way than privacy, I would say, in general. In this whole,
the executive order
we'll say this
concept trust between agencies.
Yeah. So this administration, this is kind of their take on where we need to focus on cybersecurity.
So what's relevant between privacy and trust, the guidance that's given is they're still trying to utilize to imply the privacy measures. However, they look like they're trying to push the dynamics behind communication of such information for cybersecurity event purposes. So the idea of trust among each other, trusting that information, or the guidelines behind how they present their integrity of that information. So when we get into the concept of trust itself, which it has plenty of verbiage for trust factors, relationships between trust, relationship between agencies, and desire to share such things in the event something happens to a system. So it sounds like that there's dynamics there. So the actual trust itself, the impact to public and private sectors, I'm sure there'll be plenty of things that will slow dynamics behind the trust factor on the private side. So if you're a contractor for the government and you have this contract and you relate that to your own organization and then into the public sector, because of the manner of trust, it's just like multi-factor authentication has now become prevalent across the board for even the public sector and the private sector. So we're starting to look at such dynamics as trust is also being evolving from this executive order, or start of this executive order from the itself. Within agencies, they refer to a zero trust to provide collections of concepts and ideas designed to minimize uncertainty and enforcing accuracy, least privileges, per request, access, decisions, and information. Services in the face of a network viewed as compromised. They're referring to it as a ZTA, which you haven't heard that buzzword yet, have you? It's an acronym.
I have not. That's new. Zero Trust Architecture.
Architecture. That's right.
I have then. Yeah. Thought there was some GTA type of reference there.
No, there was no ETA. It's the fact that fit these acronyms. So ZTA, but if you heard zero trust architecture, so that this is a concept that this executive order starts to trend us towards with the zero trust model. And I guess really the idea behind zero trust architecture is that they want to make sure that they can validate at each level information that flows. I guess you're familiar with the OSI model, 7 layers up and down the stack. So you have different devices, network communication pieces, interaction among them. So there's gateways for each one of those types of devices. And we get into the 5 pillars of this model, it'll start really you'll start understanding this a lot more. But really the idea behind this zero trust architecture is trust but validate, don't trust but validate. So least privilege, all those concepts we're familiar with, and just trying to hone it into one set of assortment. So just like you said, we need to bring it together under a different zero trust architecture, basically. So, and this is something not just in the government, this is also in the private sector, right? So,
I hear you talking very closely, tying the zero trust and the trust to data and users and authentication. The interesting piece is that I would tie the need for it, and as we talked on the previous show, to the physical cyber entities that we're interfacing with. And the data connected to them would be, how do you trust the data connected to them? How do you trust the users connected to them? How do you trust them connecting to each other? I guess if you look at in those pillars, right, you have what are the pillars we have? Identity, device, network, application, data. That's the device one, I guess.
Yeah, it can be visual and analytics, automation, orchestration, governance. You can apply certain things in each one of those as physical as well. So we're going to take a break right quick, Chris, and we'll come back after we hear from our sponsors.
Blockframe Technology offers next-generation blockchain-managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Okay, welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. I'm your host, Tim Montgomery, and I'm here with Chris Korog. And we are exploring the idea behind what the executive order that's come out from President Biden back in May of 2021, how it relates to this architecture we're referring to as ZTA, and then this document that's come out for the maturity of the zero trust model and the 5 pillars there. So, before the break, we were talking about the 5 pillars of trust in this trust model and how physical components or physical elements when you talk about trust and how you relate trust. Because I know you related it in previous conversations and previous podcasts. To how the physical part of this. And I believe essentially that it's conducive and like military. When you go to the military installation, how many layers of physical security do you have? I mean, I think,
physical security there is guys with guns.
Yeah,
we're physically going to watch you.
Yeah,
it's not a technological solution.
Right. So embedded ideas inside of machines, those trust vectors, like what Microsoft uses as the BitLocker, right? And encrypting and trust for a device as a piece of hardware, or the encryption of data as it flows, or just a part of the directory, things like that.
I think that's probably the big difference when I hear people from the military talk is and the government work, is that you can really assume, if you're working for a government facility, that physical security is handled.
Yeah.
It has been. It's very well done with gates, with guards, with guns, with locks, with scans, with identity of the people in and access to it, with background checks, security clearances. The physical part of it is done, so that anything physical relating to device, network, identity falls back into that category, and we can kind of just forget about it a little bit.
Yeah, you do. Well, then when we promoted the idea of working from home, those layers kind of got shedded depending on what you
exactly.
did.
And that's the difference in the commercial world. Those layers are shredded because now our devices are in consumers' hands. They're sold to different companies. Our networks span different customers. Our networks connect, they're not in our guarded area. We don't have an isolated network. Our applications are downloaded and patched by random people at different times. And our data doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to the customer. So if we're getting a hold of it, it's because they're giving it to us and then it's ours. So it's really all those things are absent of the physical protection. And that's the difference.
Yeah. So these pillars kind of accommodate or kind of bring it to light so we can get into a level where I think as we're moving along, the concept of bring your own device, I don't think of any agency that would allow that. But corporations, they definitely strive for such things. Now, I don't know as a person that I would want to bring my own device because
we do that. We have developers that work for 8 hours a week or a couple hours a month doing a couple little things for us because they want to, or even volunteers use their own device. We have them access to code repositories or whatever they're working on just for a short amount of time so they can do one task or two. In open source projects, you have the same thing. Companies having people work from home. We don't buy office equipment anymore. Our employees want to use their own stuff because they can buy a big gaming PC with lots of power or whatever fits their purpose rather than have our standard computer that we buy everybody. So, that bring your own device is almost something we just have to live with because it's going to happen whether we want to or not.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's in there. Now, government entities they still control. There's still a measure of control. And I could see the valid reason why. Because of the assortment of information, what levels, classification levels it should be at or what it is at, how that can be impacted by bring your own device. So I don't ever see it venturing down a lane where bring your own device, unless there's a shell that really locks off your computer when you're interfacing. When you go to take a test at some of these test sites now, Pearson VUE, it takes over your computer and you can't really do anything to it when you give it, you allow it to do such a thing. So you can take a test on your own computer. So I don't know if governments would ever allude to that. But this works into the identity concept, the different pillars that the device concept, and also the application workload, the data itself. So, across the board, things like that. The perspective of how the zero trust model would venture into and mature into value. I don't know if it'd ever take on the bring your own device concept or something of that measure, but I sure think that it would impact those corporations out there if they had to move to such a thing. So if they were already using this BOY, bring your own device. It just seems like this is not particularly across the board the standard. The one that the executive order is pushing is the zero trust architecture, the zero trust model concept. I get it, but I think it'll actually allude to something else, especially with the impact that it'll probably have to the private sector. So
yeah, that we released a show a little bit ago about asking a collage of people that were trying to determine what the zero trust means and what it is to them. And they seemingly just all rebranded what they were already doing under one of these pillars and said, we're doing this pillar. So how much is this just a reclassification project?
I don't know. I think you're right. I mean, from a standpoint of the government, a lot of times we're looking at this, and a lot of things we're already doing. Um, so yeah, I think it's almost like they're pulling concepts that have been there a while under one umbrella to create, I guess, a security package or a plan that would say these are the things that we would do to really secure this. But
does it simplify? Does it make things better for what you're doing?
yeah, I don't think so.
How's it working?
Yeah, I don't. In my opinion, is we're just getting into the forefront. But my thoughts is that I don't think it's going to simplify. I think it'll lose.
What do you see?
I think
Curious
it'll
about that.
more complexity as far as trust and validation. I don't know about you, but I use enough authentication device. I use, we get back to that concept of having 200 accounts and each one of them needing a password changed every 30 days. And now you've got a multifunction device and you're using your phone, and your phone is the one item. You still got a ball and neck. So regardless of what this does, you're going to have something somewhere that if I took your phone and able to get your phone and do something to it, I think you've had experience in that. I think it wouldn't matter. We could make this massive complexity, but then we've got this one thing that if you did it and used it, there's your avenue. What do you do? How do you remedy that?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I've seen, and we were speaking about this a while ago, is we really don't have the concept of a password anymore.
Yeah.
We have the concept of a password vault.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to remember 200 passwords. No. So you have to have some way to organize them. Password vault used to be our memory. It's not possible anymore. Like kind of the trust. We have too many things to rely on, too many of those random string text to understand. So we're either going with a fob, we're going with our phone, we're going with a password vault software. So again, it's relating an object, and the password goes away eventually because we have so many of them. They're all in one blob now.
Yeah, and that concept of password eventually won't be usable in the system if it becomes that complex. So it's either trending to a new way of thought to keep moving forward with how they're layering. Yeah. That's a pillar.
And that's what we look at with next generation technology, is replacing the password with the ability to randomly generate a dynamic password, having the thing that you trust, like your password vault or whatever, on a reoccurring basis, and the ability to reset that from a global perspective if you do run into problems. And the next generation will simplify that to say, I have what I have. If everybody's going to go to what I have, password vault, and what I am at, or biometric, that we have to support that with the technology rather than try to continue on the direction of, mass amount of passwords for everybody.
Yeah. And so where does that go? It's the concept behind trust again, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can only member, 30 plus people, up to 60 people at most. I don't know how you can even remember that many people. So you're going to have to rely on those people to trust. And if you it's the extension of your trust through those people. So same thing here, extension of trust through those devices, extension of trust through those layers of these pillars that they're referring to in zero trust, application layer, the network layer, and those devices.
The big part though that you have to have is all those layers is the continuous returning to trust. Especially the big one is authentication. If the user is the one going through all those layers, we have to continuously return to authenticating the user on a continuous basis over time, having the authentication trust.
So you think the pillars, the way they're designed in this zero trust maturity model, I think this is just the first stage. There's phase, say. There's phases that's just going to this thing's going to phase into. That's why they refer to as probably the maturity model. I don't think it's the see all, know all. This is how you got to get to. It does talk about optimal. And we do know that in maturity levels, a system can go up and down in those levels, depending on infrastructure, right? Legacy infrastructure goes out, new infrastructure comes in, new technologies. that maturity has to then be replaced with something that's brand new, and then it ends up occurring a different level. But like with HR, and it's like a system or a business system that would apply to HR or to an organization, how it runs, those policies and things that have to mature as a company goes through stages of experience and growth, or condensing layoffs. It experiences how its maturity model works. So same thing here. Yeah. We're really referring to information data, right? Trusted data.
Yeah. One concept, if I had to say, I'm looking at their layers and saying, I think we're kind of running close to our time here, but what's missing? I'd say there's a concept in here of something that we have in the we'll say in the commercial world more so than the government, and that's the interorganizational and the interproducts. Now, I could see how they could say that's hidden in the identity and the application, but there's also networks involved with that and the social. So, if you look at a network of people as a social, a network of organizations is a framework, an industry infrastructure, a network of computers is wired, right? Physical. Mm-hmm. We might have different types of networks that fit into the classification, and there's kind of a social, organizational, and product concepts that are blurred between where they would fit in this 5 tiers.
Yeah, I think you're right. So the maturity model here looks like a good start. The way the executive order has tried to imply. Mm-hmm. So it looks like they kind of hit the marker per se, and we're evolving from that, which may expand in this maturity model as a doctrine.
So you had said earlier, Tim, though, that you thought it's going to be more work, but I'm actually hearing that this might be, a better alignment in our last discussion here, last half of the show, that maybe it has some legs. Are you thinking?
Well, I think it's going to be work. However, I think we're going to leave some concepts behind that we've used as cornerstones in protection, access control preferably. And I think we're going to probably have to leave some of that behind. Those are not going to work in the maturity of this model. So we're going to have to find other ways to provide that.
The other thing that doesn't work in this model is the things that don't have trust, the things that are qualitative, like risk assessments, the human aspect driven stuff. Yeah. Doesn't have a place in this model.
Yeah, it's interesting. So looks like they've got some things to do, but it's a good start, I would say, phasing into, like they're referring to, maturity. So anyway, that's all the time we have today. Thank you, Chris, for being on. And then until next time, everybody take care, and we'll see you next time for cybersecurity and all the professionals out there. Thank you.
Thanks.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of NewCyberFrontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at NewCyberFrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of NewCyberFrontier.